Hello, everybody. Back for another nerdy episode with one of my favorite nerds at Right Hook. We got Luke here as well. Luke, how we doing today?
Yeah, doing great. Thanks, D.
Um, all right, let's get into it. We're gonna get into stuff that is, I think, pretty nerdy, but also at the same time very foundational for driving growth for any kind of D2C brand. And one thing I've noticed also is that these are fundamentals that we don't get to hear a lot about on socials or anything like that. I don't know, maybe it's just because it doesn't get the clicks, but it's this is where
Mhm.
the sauce really is. So much so that you did a full workshop for this for the D2C dojo community recently. Talk us through more of why these fundamentals matter so much.
Yeah, sure. So today we're going to talk about financial fundamentals, so like profitability metrics and how to sort of assess the health of your business from a profitability perspective. And the reason I think it's so important is it's foundational to pretty much every decision that you make in your business to be able to understand these metrics or to make good decisions anyway. And to your point, like not a lot of people talk about this. Like I was in business, I had my own e-commerce businesses, and no one really teaches you this stuff. And unless you maybe go to accounting school or something like that, but no one wants to do that. So yeah, it's true. And so I think this stuff is fundamental, and I think it's as a business owner, it's your responsibility to understand this stuff so that you can get to where you want to get to, which is ultimately to make money and make profit.
And I think also it provides it provides the performance team with really clear north star as well, not just chasing for ROAS, not just chasing for revenue. Yeah, let's go through what we're going to cover today, and I think that that's going to really show everyone why this matters so much and how what they're going to get out of it too.
Yeah, for sure. So today we're going to cover the profitability metrics that you need to know, how to think about your revenue and profit, and the e-commerce accounting split. So shall I kick it off to you?
Yeah, let's go.
Cool. So yeah, by the end of this video, you'll know your metrics that matter the most, Shopify's most misleading metrics, why contribution margin is a probably better metric to be looking at than revenue, and how to derive these metrics. So we're going to cover that all today. So let's kick off, and we'll start off. Let's talk about your typical profit and loss statement. So if you're a business owner, you've more than likely seen your profit and loss statement. I would hope so. And generally, this is the sort of typical layout of a profit and loss statement. We have your revenue less your cost of goods sold, which gives you your gross profit, and then we minus our operating expenses to get to our net profit or EBITDA, which we'll just call net profit for the sake of today's call. So we've got three sort of key metrics here: top line revenue, our gross profitability, and then our net profit. And that's your sort of standard P&L format that you will get, which is great, and it conforms to accounting standards and everything like that. But in terms of being able to assess the health of your business from a profitability perspective, especially when you think about e-commerce, is it doesn't quite do enough just to look at it in this kind of format. So the reason why is because for most e-commerce businesses, one of the largest expense, if not the largest line item expense for them, is the cost of advertising. And so there's this huge gap here between our gross profit number and our net profit, which is kind of just bundled into operating expenses when we look at the typical P&L. And so what it kind of misses is an ability, when you just look at it like this, to really assess the different levers that apply to an e-commerce business in terms of profitability. So what we propose, and this is what we do when we look at an e-commerce business and their P&L, is to layer in a specific kind of e-commerce accounting profit and loss setup, which looks a little bit like this. So it has a lot of the same elements: revenue less cost of delivery to equal gross profit. And then what we do is layer in a separate cost of advertising here to bring us to a contribution profit, sometimes known as contribution margin. And then we can minus off additional operating expenses to get to our net profit figure. Now, the benefit of this type of accounting setup, or just a way to look at your profitability, is this. So we can, by changing up our P&L and looking at things this way, then we can measure different levels of efficiency within our business and look at the different levers that are within inside our e-commerce business. So our gross profit, which is revenue less cost of delivery, gives us an idea of our product margin efficiency. How efficiently are we relative to revenue getting the product into the customer's hands? And then the gap between gross profit and contribution profit, which is cost of advertising, gives us an understanding of our marketing efficiency. How effectively is our marketing driving the revenue and contributing to cover our operating expenses, our net profit? And so the gap between contribution profit and net profit, which is minusing our operating expenses, will help us to see what our operating efficiency is. How efficiently are we operating our business as a percentage of our revenue?
Yeah, and
Any
I think
questions
this
on that?
this is a really important slide also because of the fact that visually you can very quickly see what is downstream by way of, well, if your product margin efficiency, or just let's just call it product efficiency for now, if your product efficiency starts to make changes upstream closer to the revenue side between revenue and gross profit, it has such dramatic effects in terms of the efficacy of the advertising also, right? So stuff like, what are you doing on the prices front? What are you doing on the cost of goods front? There's so many other metrics that are bundled into cost of delivery, but point being, it very quickly you can go, oh well, let's look at this upstream, let's look at this in the middle, let's look at this like further downstream, as we get closer to the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Cool. So I think it makes sense in terms of I want to kind of cover each of these metrics by themselves and talk a little bit more about them. So let's start off with revenue, the one that we tend to like the most, which is the money coming in. And you would think like revenue is a fairly straightforward metric. It's just money in, like nothing too complicated about it. But the thing is with revenue is there's lots of different ways to think about your revenue in terms of where is it coming from and how to actually define what revenue is. So I just want to kind of cover that today. Because one of the key things you'll find if you're a Shopify business owner is that there's actually 3 different kind of sales metrics that you'll get inside your dashboard, and they're all kind of a little bit misleading in their own kind of way. And I wanted to kind of talk through the different ways that these 3 different sales metrics that you get in your Shopify are misleading. So the 3 metrics that you'll typically see are gross sales, net sales, and total sales. And when you open up your Shopify dashboard and you look at your analytics, typically what you're going to see is your total sales metric. Let's just break down how each of these are defined. So gross sales are all sales excluding discounts and returns. Net sales are all sales including discounts, returns, excluding shipping charges and taxes. And then total sales are all sales including discounts, returns, shopping charges, and taxes. So let me go through why none of these sales figures are a good reflection of sales revenue. Let's start with gross sales. The problem with gross sales is just everything. It doesn't include any discounts that you've applied. It includes taxes. It includes everything basically. And that's not actually the money that we're going to get in our bank account by any
So
stretch of imagination.
so I'm gonna jump into this also because,
Yeah,
as you know, I've been playing around with a lot of the Shopify API data extraction, which once you start going into that world, you get a lot more intimate with how the numbers are actually made up and how they're like what is the roll up to gross sales. The other part about gross sales also is the fact that it accounts for all the line items that are in the original order. Say for example, today Luke made an order for 6 different items, different line items, one quantity of each. And tomorrow or later in the afternoon, Luke says, hey, emails in and goes, hey, you know what? I changed my mind. Can I just only get 2 of those, please? Just 2 line items instead of the 4. Now, if gross on a per order basis, the gross sales would capture all of the line items, as opposed to, especially, then you start getting into like whether the charge itself is authorized, it's fully paid, and any type of staff amendments that get done in the middle by doing staff edits, uh, it starts getting really messy and really confusing. So you just get the blanket gross sales number.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think too many people look at gross sales anyway, which is good. It's not one of the metrics that's kind of forefront in Shopify, but definitely net sales and total sales. So net sales, the issue with net sales is that it doesn't include shipping charges. So shipping charges in Shopify is charges that you've actually charged your customers for shipping. So that is actually revenue that you're receiving. So it should be included in your sales figures for sure. And the problem with total sales is it does include shipping charges, but it also includes taxes, so sales tax. And on any P&L, sales tax is not included. So your revenue figure is always exclusive of sales tax, as well as any products or any expenses that you have. Your P&L is not going to reflect the sales tax that you paid for those either. So ideally, we want our revenue number to match what our P&L is eventually going to look like. And so the recommendation in this case, when you are looking at revenue in Shopify, is you really need to, we've called it just sales revenue, which is basically net sales plus shipping charges or total sales minus taxes. I think the most elegant way to do it is just make sure that you minusing your sales tax off total sales, and that's probably the best revenue number to be working to. We don't want to make it too complicated, but we also want to make sure that we're not counting sales tax as revenue for us, because that's not our revenue, that's the government's money, unfortunately.
Yes, especially for any type of brands that would have GST, VAT, where
Yes.
the prices are baked. Sorry, the sales tax is baked into the price itself. Versus, say, for example, in the US, where you've got the product price and you've got sales taxes as a complete separate line item, not baked into it. So again,
Yes.
once you start having to
Yeah.
play with the API, you got to start messing around with all that stuff.
Yeah,
And then
for
there's the
sure.
other portion, I think, which all you guys watching should be aware of too, which is the dollar value of returns does not equate to the dollar value of refunds. So that
Yes.
adds to the confusion for these very seemingly simple Shopify metrics too. So let me give you an example. If you, Luke made that order of the 6 different items, this in this scenario, they all got fulfilled and Luke received 6 of them. 2 days later, Luke goes, you know what? I don't like 4 of them. I only want to keep the 2. So I'm going to institute a return back to me, the merchant, right? Now, here's the thing. The returns value might be those 4 items. However, if Luke decides to use, say, something like some type of third-party app for store credit, then effectively we've captured that revenue. It's just sitting in store credit. So now it starts to really get into some fairly complicated type of accounting. That's number one. And then number two also is, for those 4 items that come back, can they be restocked or no? Because if they can be thrown back into inventory, then how are we going to manage, or how are we going to account for the cost of goods for that order? So a lot of things can happen between someone making an order and the order actually being finalized and finished. So all these types of complications really matter when it goes into, or if you need to like triple click into the details, it starts to become a quite a complicated affair.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, so let's continue talking about revenue. And one thing that is kind of a theme that we'll talk about here is how to think about your revenue and your profitability in 2 distinct buckets. And I think this is important kind of mindset to have when you're looking at your profitability, is thinking about the split between new customer and returning customer, both in terms of revenue, but in terms of profitability, because they are 2 kind of distinct sets of customers that have their own sort of distinct set of behaviors and profitability metrics. So my recommendation is, whenever you're looking at revenue and assessing your revenue, is to look at it as the split between new customer and returning customer revenue. And so new customer revenue is just the number of new customers times the first order AOV. And then returning customer revenue is the number of returning customers times the frequency that they purchase or repurchase times their returning customer AOV. And so that if we're looking at revenue over time, that's how those 2 distinct buckets are made up. And so remember, a big part of why we want to understand our business fundamentals is so that we can make informed decisions. And so understanding the split and understand the health of our business, it's really important as an e-commerce business to understand where your profit and revenue is coming from as a split between new customers and returning customers. Okay, so we've talked about revenue. Let's talk about gross profit. Now, there's lots of different definitions for gross profit. You go to one accountant to another, and there'll be a different definition for gross profit. It's not to say that any of those are wrong. Obviously, these people have accounting qualifications, but there are different ways to look at gross profit, and I just want to kind of talk you about through the way that we think about gross profit and the definition from our perspective. So, to summarize, gross profit is the profit you make on sales, accounting for all direct costs associated with delivering the products to your customers. So let's talk about this a little bit more. So just to sum up, gross profit is sales revenue less the cost of delivery. And I just want to talk through what we include when we think about the cost of delivery. So cost of delivery is everything from the landed costs through to the warehousing, the picking, the packing, and the actual processing of the transaction to the actual delivery to the customer. So it's right that whole spectrum of variable costs from production or manufacture of the product or purchasing of that product right through to the cost to process the order and get it into the customer's hands. So that's what we call the cost of delivery. So gross profit is sales revenue less all these costs, and that gives you your gross profit basically. And the reason it's called cost of delivery, you may have heard of the word COGS. Because we like to think about COGS and cost of delivery being two separate things, because quite often, gross profit is defined as revenue less COGS equals gross profit. But for us, the definition of COGS is the landed cost of the product. So that's the production, any transport to get it to your country or from wherever it was manufactured to your warehouse, any custom duties that you may have paid, any forex exchange fees you may have paid, or any other bank charges or duties that you may have paid to get it to your warehouse as the business owner. And then the remainder from that, your warehouse or wherever your products are stored to the customer's hands, is the remaining expenses that are factored into the cost of delivery. So I'd like to have a distinct definition between what is COGS and what is cost of delivery. Any questions on that, Dean?
No, that makes a ton of sense. It's really crazy to me how, especially at there are e-com brands that completely get by. Like you can scale up, like you have brands that just like grow into what, like late, high 7-figure, possibly even like early 8-figure revenue, and still just work off of COGS as the primary metric that they're looking at, not accounting for the downstream ones that sit outside of COGS that make up cost of delivery. I just needed to get that off my
Yes.
chest because it's just
Yeah.
insanity.
Yeah, for sure. Because if these these parts of the expenses that get the product into your customer's hands aren't accounted for under gross profit, then where are they going? They're probably going under your operating expenses, but it's not really a good reflection of your operating efficiency. If we go back to that slide that I showed at the beginning, the reason why we want to bundle this together is this is really helps us understand what our product margin efficiency is. So how efficiently are we getting as a percentage of revenue the product into the customer's hands. So we need to account for all these different expenses along the journey.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'll show us.
And
Yeah,
actually,
sorry.
this slide is helpful because it allows us to then go, well, if you look at each of those ones, short of say customs and duties and forex, the rest of them there are actual areas of possible negotiation between
Yes.
the merchant and whoever the supplier or the vendor is of those different items, right? So from a production cost standpoint and transport, the pick and pack, how to optimize for those types of costs, payment processing fees, especially if you start to scale up or you're doing really large volume, and delivery
Yes.
too, just choosing the right type of delivery partner and shipping partner to be able to optimize against each of those areas. So it's not just like, oh, well, too bad, so sad, these are my costs. There are so many things that even just here, which is the first upstream thing that's the contributor to EBITDA, there's so many action items that can be made here already.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely lots of levers within the big lever.
Mm. Oh
Our
God.
recommendation is that your COGS, your cost of goods sold, should be loaded into Shopify. So not your cost of delivery, but your cost of goods sold should be loaded into Shopify. And the reason for that is it helps you to be able to pull reports from Shopify. So I'll show you another slide in a moment. But before we do that, I just want to kind of show you the difference between how some people might account for their cost of goods versus what you probably should be looking at. So this is an example of an invoice that you may have got. We've ordered 100 units of our product here, and the unit price is $14. And so a lot of times people will say, okay, my cost of goods is $14. Um, and that's not necessarily true, because what happens is we've actually got to ship this 100 units to us. Let's assume these have come from overseas. We've got to pay for export documentation. We've got to pay for insurance on that shipping. And then once it gets to the destination, we've got to pay import duty, only 5% here, probably a little bit touchy right now. Probably more like 500%. But customs clearance, quarantine inspection, currency conversion fee. And so before we know it, we've actually paid, rather than $1,400 for those 100 units, we've actually ended up paying $2,360. So our actual cost of goods sold is actually $23.60 per unit, not $14. Now that's a massive difference. So this is why, and if you're making decisions about, your cost per acquisition on a $14 COGS versus a $23.60 COGS, uh,
Mm.
you're going to be massively out unless you are accounting for all these charges. So it is a pain in the ass to be able to break this down, especially with, exchange rates changing all the time. I mean, that's just the nature of exchange rates. Cost of shipping changing, the amount of units you might order might be different, and you may get a different discount from your supplier. So it is a challenge for sure as a business owner to keep track of what your cost of goods sold is, but I think the value in it is definitely there. And if you're not tracking it or keeping on top of it, then you may be losing little percentage points here that you're not even aware of, and that's going to your bottom line basically.
Yeah, especially if you're telling your performance team to uh, just keep scaling and just keep spending as long as we're hitting this number. If that
Yes.
number is off, you can really start. It can really start to you're borrowing pain. You're borrowing future pain for just not going through this type of stuff. I do have a question for you though, Luke. Like,
Yeah.
does should every should the e-commerce business have this either like do they have to go 100% absolutely correct, keep track of forex all the time, be able to track it in? Because my the reason why I'm bringing this up is because my worry is, and sometimes when I see that cogs aren't loaded into Shopify, which is just absolutely mental to me, but anyway, my worry is that they'll go, well, if I can't get it 100% correct, then why put the number in?
Mm.
Because then I could be working off of falsy numbers,
Yeah,
right?
for
But
sure.
what's a good way to think through this?
I think at the end of the day, that your actual P&L, that, or your profit and loss statement that you're going to get from your accountant or from your accounting software, is a reconciliation of all the ins and outgoings from your business. So that is going to tell you the truth at the end of the day. And so, we can't necessarily replicate that without a lot of effort, especially for a small business. So I think we have to accept that it's not going to be 100% accurate. But I think if we are putting our best foot forward in terms of trying to account for all the variable costs that are associated with getting the product to us, then I think that's a good start. And so I had a question the other day, like, what if the exchange rate, I've got 100 units here, I've ordered another 1,000, and they're coming in at a much higher cost. Do I keep the cogs the same as the 100, or do I keep it, change it to the 1,000 that I've just ordered, or do I, try and blend the cost? I was like, you probably want to err on the side of caution and err on the side of conservative. If the majority of your new units are going to be at this new cost, then you should update your cogs to the new cost and don't worry about blending it in. Like I say, it's almost impossible to be 100% perfect,
Mm.
but we just want to make sure that we're putting our best foot forward. I think that's it's not very specific. It's quite vague, but you kind of get what I'm saying.
Yeah, sure. Load up the main items that the main line items in here that stay fairly are not as dynamic and volatile all the time, um, and just apply. a more conservative frame of mind when loading up these numbers, and that general guidance would get you 90% of the way there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like obviously it's going to be less challenging for a brand that only has one or two products or one or two SKUs. If you've got thousands of SKUs, then it becomes much more of a challenge. But yeah, so in terms of where it goes in your Shopify, if you don't know, there within your product listing there is this option here to add the cost per item. And like I say, we just want to put our cost of goods in here. So we don't want to include those other expenses like the pick and pack fee, the processing fee, and the actual courier cost. We want to account for those separately. But if we can account for the COGS in Shopify, then that's a really good start, because then we can start to track the other stuff separately. Because generally a payment processing fee is not going to be, it's going to be independent of each product. It's just a percentage of the actual transaction. And similarly, our cost to deliver, we can average out across all our costs on an average cost per unit delivery. It's much easier for us to assess the impact of like a discounting period or a sales period, because like when we look at sales period, if we're looking at top line revenue, obviously those are normally really good spikes in our revenue throughout the year when we were in those promotional periods. But what was the actual gross profitability of that promotion? And by having your COGS loaded into Shopify, we can start to pull those reports and see like what is the seasonal impact of on our gross profit margins.
Yes.
Is there a seasonal impact to our gross profit margins?
And it may actually makes it not only just easier but possible to then programmatically be able to pull those things out during that sales period through the API, as opposed to, imagine if cost of goods was just completely empty, then you've got to make someone sit there, go through each one, and start to plot out what the COGS are against each item. So painful to just be able to perform some really what should be simple analysis.
Yeah, for sure. One of the analysis that we like to do is like, what are our top selling products, and then in terms of sales revenue, but what are our top selling products in terms of margin and gross profit? And if you've got your COGS loaded into Shopify, you can start doing that analysis, because ideally we want to focus on those items that have the highest margin and are deriving the most revenue. Like that's the place to double down. So it's just another benefit of having this loaded in, basically.
Yeah, I can't believe we just had to spend the past few minutes trying to convince someone, whoever's watching this, to load up their COGS if they haven't already.
Yeah, for sure. You can bulk edit, so you don't have to go into every single product one by one. There is the ability to bulk edit your margins. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about some gross margin benchmarks. Now, every business is different. Different businesses can thrive with different levels of gross profit margins. So, but as a benchmark, if people wanted to ask for a benchmark, then you want to have your gross margin sitting in somewhere in the 60-70 range. 65% would be a really good starting point in terms of your gross margins. Like I say, it's going to be different for different businesses. Supermarkets survive on like 15% gross margin. They make plenty of money, no doubt. But for an e-commerce brand, considering we need to, 65% is like after my cost of delivery, how much of my revenue is left. So 65% allows you to then cover your fixed costs, your cost of advertising, and then have some profitability left. The higher your gross margin, the more money you have left to account for those things. The lower your margin, the less money you have to account for those things. So if I was to put a flag in the sand, I would say 65% is a good benchmark for an e-commerce business. But you can have lower margins and be successful. But it's just going to make it much harder for you. You're going to have some real strengths in terms of your operating efficiency or your marketing efficiency.
Yeah, and to say another way, it puts the lower that gross margin number is as a percentage, then it starts to put pressure on your operating efficiency and your marketing efficiency. That's where you go. You start having conversations like, well, it must bring back some type of crazy multiple. For every dollar of marketing spent, it must bring back like $55 or something crazy like this thing to be
sure.
feasible. So then customer acquisition starts to become a really difficult endeavor when it comes to CAC.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about contribution profit. That's that additional profitability metric that we want to layer into our profit and loss statement. And so contribution profit if you think about the word contribution, it's how much profit is left to contribute to your fixed costs and your net profit after we've factored in the cost of delivery and your direct marketing costs. So contribution profit is effectively what profit remains from sales revenue after subtracting all variable costs, including advertising. And so it's gross profit less direct marketing expenses equals ad spend. So I'll just show you a slide which kind of represents that. And so when we think about direct marketing costs, what we want to include is all ad spend, and any commissions on sales or commissions on ad spend. So if you have an affiliate network and you are paying a commission on sales, then that would be included in your direct marketing costs. And so gross profit less direct marketing costs equals your contribution profit.
For the brands in the who are watching this that would be engaging in stuff like, we're doing product seeding and we're paying for content creators and we're doing all that type of stuff. Let's keep it really simple. The content creators aren't affiliates; they're just pure play
Mhm.
pay for content.
Yes.
Would you advise for them to throw those costs into the direct marketing costs? Would that get lumped in there also?
That is a business decision that you can make. I think for the sake of simplicity, I would put that under operating expenses, especially if it's something that you're, if you've got a retainer for people, then it's more of a fixed or semi-fixed cost, and it's not necessarily a direct marketing cost. So I think for simplicity, to put it under operating expenses rather than your direct marketing costs. But it's a business decision. If you want to roll that into there, you can. I think it just makes it more difficult to track. And there's a question about whether or not it's a direct marketing cost or not, in terms of, is it variable in line with sales? Generally ad spend and commission on sales, they attract quite well to revenue, whereas these fixed expenses, so your marketing manager, for example, that isn't a direct marketing cost, even though they are directly involved in marketing. That is an overhead expense.
And maybe one more explicit question then. I have each quarter I have a video shoot and a photo shoot and an editorial shoot and all that budgeted away. Luke, based on what you're saying, I really should not be putting that under direct marketing costs. I should be putting that, just for simplicity's sake, into my operational expenses as well,
Yes, absolutely, for
even though
sure.
I'm using that footage in my ads.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yep, for sure. Okay, so just just to reiterate the point around contribution profit, and it being the amount of profit left over to contribute towards net profit and operating expenses, we need enough contribution profit to cover our OPEX or operating expenses and any net profit that we want to make. So in the case of if I had $15,000 of operating expenses or fixed costs and I wanted to make $5,000 net profit, then effectively I need to make $20,000 contribution profit in order to cover those two things. So just one way to think about, what contribution profit is and why it's kind of called contribution. So just like revenue, we also want to think about contribution margin over time, split into two distinct categories. So new customer contribution margin and returning customer contribution margin. Because just like with revenue, these are kind of, what flows up to create these metrics is slightly different. So first thing to think about when we're thinking about splitting out new customer contribution margin and returning customer contribution margin is that the primary job of our paid channels or our advertising spend is to acquire new customers.
Say that one more time, just for the
The
people in the
primary
back.
job of your paid channels is the primary job of your paid channel spend is to acquire new customers. So that means that if you're running on Meta or Google or TikTok, the majority, if not all of your budget should be focused on new customer acquisition. So for most brands, that would look like 90% plus. Obviously, there are times where you are going to want to spend some of your media spend on existing customers, but the primary job is new customer acquisition. So when we think about allocating our ad spend towards those two different buckets of new customer contribution margin and returning customer contribution margin, we're not really paying to reacquire those customers. That's the whole point of acquisition: is we acquire customers and then over time we retain them through our less expensive channels like email. So slightly complex sort of slide here in terms of a little bit of algebra, I guess. But I guess the key point here is when we think about new customer contribution margin, it factors in all our ad spend. So it's our new customer revenue less our cost of delivery, or multiplying it by our gross margin percentage less all our ad spend. And then returning customer revenue is just returning customer revenue times its gross margin. We don't factor any ad spend into the calculation for returning customer contribution margin, unless we are, as a business decision, deciding to spend a deliberate amount of money on returning customers. Then we may want to include that in the calculation. But for simplicity, if your primary job is to drive new customer acquisition, then we will just factor that into new customer contribution margin. So the reason we want to split this up is because it helps us to think about, first of all, how much profit are we making on our new customer acquisition? Like, are we actually making any profit on acquiring customers? Is there any contribution to fixed expenses and net profit from our new customer acquisition? And then from returning customer contribution margin, how much of that is contributing to our net profitability and our fixed overheads? So there's a lot more we could talk about this, but so I don't want to go into too much detail. But in terms of like when we think about how to optimize each of those two things, new customer acquisition, we can really measure the efficiency here by metrics like acquisition MER, so our new customer revenue divided by ad spend, or nCPA. I think AMER is a better metric. And then in terms of returning customer contribution margin, efficacy here is really measured by your CLTV, like how are you growing lifetime value from your returning customers.
Why your preference for AMER versus new customer CPA?
The reason I like AMER is because it factors in the AOV. So nCPA is just
Naked
the
on its
amount of
own.
ad spend. Yeah, it's just amount of ad spend divided by number of orders, but there's no factoring in how much revenue is driven per, in terms of, it doesn't factor in the AOV of the acquisition. So that's why I prefer AMER.
Yeah. I really love this slide for so many reasons. So many reasons. And the primary one is because having visibility over these numbers and actually reviewing them and performing analysis. I'm saying analysis is some kind of like super nerdy thing. Just looking at those numbers and figuring out what story it's telling you informs decisions around so many business levers to pull. It really is like a business strategy decision. Even what you said just before around, are we making any profit out of acquiring a new customer? Are we breaking even, or is it an intentional loss leader because we are just that type of brand, and we know based off of historical analysis, or even if it's a startup like competitor analysis, that if we can get it sticky enough, maybe because it's a subscription brand, or maybe because of so many other reasons, that the returning customer contribution margin makes up, the LTV portion justifies that business strategy move, or that positioning move to then go, we're going to price it as such because really we make it up on the back end. Or if, say, for example, we are in the one-off purchase type brand vertical, then that really doesn't work as well. Or really infrequent kind of purchase, right? Like if it's hardware like this, for example, and you have maybe one or two SKUs without any kind of accessories, then really that's it. Like that's the thing.
Yeah. In that case, your focus has to be on, your majority of focus has to be on your new customer contribution margin, and the profitability you make on that first sale is the key determinant to how much profit you make generally.
Yeah. And no, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, for a lot of e-commerce businesses, you can, effectively, that do have that returning customer element, you can effectively think as new customer acquisition is the growth engine for your business, and the returning customer contribution margin is the profit generating engine for your business. And in an ideal scenario, you have enough returning customer contribution margin to cover your OPEX and your net profit expectations, so that you can effectively acquire new customers as cheaply as possible, as close to break even as possible, if that is, the goal to grow your business. that's a great position to be in, where you're not relying on first order profitability to cover your operating expenses and your net profit ambitions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it provides, knowing these numbers provides the basis for very productive, informative conversations with the team, as opposed to I just want AMER up, CLTV up, nCPA down.
Yes, for sure.
Do what you need to do to make that happen. It removes or it provides the ability to actually have those types of formative discussions and actually set targets, as opposed to more, less.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we move on?
Let's do it.
All right, let's talk about net profit or EBITDA. So there's various levels of net profit or definitions for net profit, and the one that we want to talk about is EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. We like to call it net profit because it's a little bit simpler. But obviously, you can have net profit after all those things have been taken off as well. But for the sake of this conversation, we just like to think about net profit and EBITDA being the same thing. So that is what remains from sales revenue after subtracting all variable costs, including advertising and operating expenses. So net profit is contribution profit less operating expenses. And I just want to cover the definition for operating expenses, aka OPEX. So it's the costs associated with running your business that aren't directly tied to your product production, fulfillment, or direct advertising. And so key characteristics are they're either fixed or semi-fixed costs. They don't change directly with sales volume. They support the overall business operations, and they're required regardless of how many sales you make. So just to go into a little bit more detail, here's some OPEX examples. So you've got SaaS, staff and services, office and admin, and professional services. And I've kind of broken down some of the things. And I guess one thing to kind of call out here is owner's salary. Now, if you're a founder, you have the decision whether or not to draw a salary, obviously, in your business, but that is going to fall under your operating expenses.
Or how
But
big
another
or
way,
how small to draw the salary too. So it's not just the
yeah, for
part of it
sure,
then.
yeah. So this can make a big difference in your operating expenses, whether or not you're actually taking a salary, or the way to not include any income that you're taking from the business is to take it as dividends from profit. So that's a decision that you can make as a business owner, but any money that you take from the business may not necessarily be included in OPEX, depending on whether it is a salary or whether you're drawing it as dividends.
And I think interesting to note also, right? Like you hear you hear those early days stories of various different types of now fairly large brands, and so many of them, one common pattern is the fact that owner salary was almost non-existent for the very early days, just so that they can maximize their ability to grow the business.
Yes.
As opposed to just going crazy and ham with the owner salary, especially during the early on days, just to try to race towards that first Lambo.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's again benchmarks. It's different for each business, but if we were to put if we would put our flag in the sand again, I think if you're operating at around about a 20% operating expense to revenue ratio, then you're running fairly lean, and that's probably a good spot to be in. Like I say, it's different for different businesses, but 20% is probably a good benchmark to think about in terms of your operating expenses, which is probably a good sort of segue to talk about the e-commerce accounting split. So we've talked about all these different areas of profitability and expenses that are coming out of your business. So and we've talked about benchmarks of 65% gross profit, which would be 35% cost of delivery. Talked about OPEX being 20% of revenue. So one thing that you can do is start to look at the split between cost of delivery, direct marketing costs, operating expenses, and net profit. And so I'm going to show you a few examples. I've got one on the screen here. This is probably a typical kind of makeup for an e-commerce business. And if we think about benchmarks, cost of delivery is 35%, which means their gross profit margin is 65%. direct marketing costs are 35% of revenue, which is around about a 3x MER. Operating expenses at that benchmark of 20%, which leaves 10% for net profit. So at the end of the day, your revenue has to be distributed somewhere, and it's going to have some sort of a split. And I guess the good thing about having visibility on this is for you to identify what is the makeup of your business, and where are the levers that I need to pull, or what are the multiple levers I could potentially pull to get to the most important wedge on that circle, which is the net profit percentage. Because in this case, if my OPEX is 30% of revenue, then my net profit is 0%. Yeah.
And there's something to be said about, especially when we're talking about pies, there's something to be said about the size of the pie also. So
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
so much of this split is also contingent on the life cycle stage of the brand and the business.
Yes.
As it starts to grow and mature and move into a different scale, then these numbers don't stay static as a truth or fact across the entire life cycle of the business too, because there are, like we've said before, like so many levers that get pulled, but also so
Yeah.
many different types of operating circumstances depending on the size of the business also.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think percentages are necessary. I mean, like if you're making, in this example here, if the brand was only making $100 revenue, then $1, I'd rather have 5% of $1 million of revenue than 10% of $100. So yeah, percentages can be a little bit, there's probably, we don't want to look at the hard numbers. What are the actual dollar amounts that we want to make? But in terms of assessing your business, and taking a snapshot to see where your revenue is distributed, this is useful. But in terms of setting a target, obviously that's good in terms of thinking about how much do we want to allocate to operating expenses, for example. But that's really going to be contingent on how much revenue you're making. So one lever is to obviously grow revenue and keep your fixed costs the same, or the other lever is to reduce your fixed costs and keep the revenue the same. So yeah, percentage are only so useful, for sure. It's the dollars in your bank account that make the difference. I'll just show another couple of examples. In this case here, this is an example of where we could have direct marketing costs that are 50%, so a 2x MER, but we've got really good margins. So cost of delivery is 20%, which means our gross margins are 80%. We're running super, super lean with an OPEX of 10%, and we're making 20% net profit. So again, you can still actually have a better outcome, even if, technically you're spending half your revenue on direct marketing. You could still walk away with a better outcome than the previous example. And then here's another example here. Cost of delivery is 35.5, direct marketing cost 36.4, OPEX 27.3, net profit 0.9%. Again, these are all just different examples of different e-commerce businesses and how they may be split up. But at the end of the day, your business has a pie, and hopefully, as a percentage of revenue, cost of delivery, direct marketing costs, and OPEX aren't more than your revenue, because that is another scenario where our pie doesn't actually contain all the expenses, and we actually have a minus net profit figure, which is not too uncommon, to be fair. So probably worth talking about the profitability analysis sheet that we use here at Right when a brand comes in, and we assess this on an ongoing basis as well, as we look at all these different elements. And we do a really good breakdown, and we look at the e-commerce accounting split, and we look at all the unit economics from an aggregate point of view. Yeah, do you want to talk about this sheet?
Yeah, well, looking at your numbers to be able to, one, get a sense of where a brand is and where it's seeking to go, um, just so that we have some kind of trajectory and direction, is one thing. And then to be able to use this type of data to inform how we are tracking and trucking along towards and stepping towards that goal becomes immensely helpful, whether that is on a daily snapshot rolled up into weekly snapshots, which then roll up into, say, even for monthly and quarterly. To be able to have insight over this then starts to become a a must-have, like a necessary thing. I guess just in the same way, you really don't want to be driving an F1 with like no visibility out of your visor whatsoever. You just have no idea where you are. You have no
Yeah.
idea where you are in relation to the finish line, to where you first started, or whether you are where you are in relation to a wall that you could possibly be slamming into as well. Um, so it becomes super helpful. And I think, like, right, Luke, for us, even to use this as a conversation starter to then fuel all of the different business decisions flowing through, of course, to performance marketing decisions as well, but the business decisions that then um, come with the 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 next steps and action items that we have to take to be able either to make up ground or to accelerate the growth forward because we're getting signals. It's such a helpful tool to be able to do so and have that conversation with the brand side, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that brings us to the end of the presentation. Is there more stuff to? Are there more slides after this?
That's it.
That's pretty much it. I'll leave this up here for a second, just for anyone that wants to nerd out on the. Nah, you know what? I'm just gonna move on and bring us back to you and I again, because that might be giving people an absolute headache. Luke, thanks for covering thanks for covering through this. It's so absolutely vital for brand owners to know this type of stuff, and also just for the teams themselves. So many between you and I and the rest of the team, we've encountered so many brands that have either in-house performing teams, or they're working with agencies or consultants, and handing them North Stars, which really aren't making a business impact, or
Mm.
not even driving them in the direction that they truly want to go. So
Yes.
I'm so glad that we did this. And like Luke, like you said, every single brand is so dramatically different. Uh, whether it's single SKU or a just a handful of SKUs, especially if you're hardware or if you're doing stuff like this, for example, versus fashion or jewelry where they could go up into the hundreds or even thousands of SKUs.
Yeah.
It starts to become a very unique exercise for each brand. So while these numbers are super helpful, I think everyone should, one, yes, absolutely heed the benchmarks that Lou provided us, but then also start to look internally at your brand and assess where you are currently right now. Uh, Anyone that needs help doing so, do reach out. I've got the link in the description down below. We can have a look at where your brand is at and then use that to determine what the next steps are to be able to get to that goal that you're setting out for yourself across the next 12, 24, 36 months. But if you don't have these numbers, then it becomes very challenging to be able to do so. Very challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've in a completely different episode, Luke talks about how you can just scale yourself into absolute oblivion. It's so true. I think now,
Yes.
after you guys watching this, you can tell how definitely you can fall into that trap very easily. Um, hey, Luke, what there that presentation, there are so many rabbit holes that we can go down. What are some of
Yeah.
the rabbit holes that we could possibly go down in different videos?
Oh, there's lots, D. I mean, from a gross margin perspective, we can talk about the different levers that you can pull to improve your margins. I mean, we kind of covered it very lightly. I think there's a lot more to talk about in terms of looking at your business and the split between new customer and returning customer contribution margin. Um, how to set targets based on that, how to forecast. There's so much stuff that we can talk about. Obviously, we
Mm,
covered everything quite lightly today. Um, but yeah, there's a bunch more we can talk about.
yeah, for sure. One thing that I personally am excited to be able to dig into is overlaying those numbers and the way to think about those metrics that matter, and overlaying that against e-commerce CRO, because I contend that e-commerce CR conversion rate optimization, um, and overlaid against new customer contribution margin has so much more to do than just, oh, change the color of the button, or following through that landing page conversion rate optimization, on page optimization. It has so much more to do with, well, is there sticker shock because the shipping price that's not listed anywhere, or that is buried down under somewhere, uh, is only shown upon checkout, and it's, for a $40 item, it's a $60 shipping price, for example. That's going to hurt conversion rate.
Yeah.
Or various
Yeah.
different ways to bundle product so that the average order value for that first order goes up. Um, there's so much more to be able to manipulate for conversion rate optimization that is beyond on-page optimization. I'm very excited for us to be able to dig into that.
Yeah.
Great. I guess we've got a whole bunch more videos that people are going to be able to check out soon.
Yeah, I think so.
In the meantime, we are wrapping it up here. If you have any questions, please throw them into the comments. And like I said before, if you do need someone to have a look at your numbers, it's always helpful to get a second opinion. Description down in the link below. Luke, thank you so much for today. Everyone
Cheers,
else,
Steve.
we'll see you in the next video. Adios, everybody.